2023 is almost finished. A great year for baseball. Hundreds of teams, thousands of players took the field around the world. A memorable year for many. But just like any year, for some teams, it was a year to forget. Today, let's look at the worst teams in 2023, the teams that finished with the worst records in all the major baseball leagues around the world. I'll limit it to the leagues I normally cover here, the 3 East Asian leagues, 4 European leagues, MLB and LMB in North America, 8 Caribbean winter leagues, and the Australian League. If you know of any other really bad teams in 2023, anywhere in the world, let us all know in the comments just how bad they were. For the winter leagues, the season is still going on and will continue into the new year. For that reason, we'll go with the team that finished last in the 2022-23 season. Some of these teams just had one really bad season. For others, it's a regular thing. The fun part about putting this list together is seeing how teams follow up on it the following year. You see some great turnaround stories, and we can already see some of those right now in the winter leagues. Since the winter leagues are the first ones to end their seasons every year, we'll start there. In the Dominican Republic, 2 teams tied for the worst record in Lidom, Toros del Este and Leones del Escogido. Both teams finished at 18-32, a win percentage of .360. Both teams were decent at home. Toros were 12-13, Leones were 14-11. It was on the road where they struggled, especially Leones. Toros were 6-19, Leones 4-21. For Toros, pitching was the problem. Team ERA of .365 was the highest in Lidom, also had the highest team whip and the fewest strikeouts. Offense wasn't much better. Second lowest team scoring, worst team batting, and fewest stolen bases. Leones were the worst team offensively, lowest total of runs scored, lowest on-base percentage and slugging, second lowest team batting, lowest home run total, second lowest stolen base total. Pitching was actually pretty good though, third lowest team ERA. Leones were one of the strongest teams in Lidom a decade ago, with 4 league titles between 2010 and 2016, but they finished in the bottom 2 in each of the last 3 seasons. This year they're looking a little better, now in 4th place. Toros were league champions and Caribbean Series champions in the 2019-2020 season. A year later they were a playoff team, but that followed with 2 consecutive last place finishes. Not much better this year. They are 5th out of the 6 Lidom teams at this time. In Puerto Rico's LBPRC, RA12 was once again the team at the bottom of the standings when the season ended. 14 wins, 36 losses, for a win percentage of .280. Second from the bottom in runs scored, 151 runs in a 50-game schedule, so 3 per game. The real issue was pitching, 230 runs surrendered, or 4.6 per game, by far the most in the 6-team LBPRC. This was only RA12's 3rd season in the LBPRC. The first year they were 2-16, second year 8-24, so last year's record of 14-36 was actually their best yet, and they're looking even better this year. Looks like they won't make the playoffs, but they are 8-16, and in 5th place, not last. The Cuban Elite League played its very first season a year ago. Since the Cuban National Series became a summer league, the Elite League was created, merging the 16 teams from the National Series into 6 All-Star teams. The worst of these 6 teams was Cafetaleros. At 19-29, they were number 6, 1 game behind the number 5 team, win percentage of .396. They scored the fewest runs and allowed the most. Seems obvious that they would finish last, but they almost didn't. And that's all I can say about Cafetaleros, really. It was their first and last year of existence. They changed the setup now to where they promote the top 6 teams from the National Series into the Elite League. You'll never hear from Cafetaleros again. In Venezuela's LVBP, Águilas del Zulia were 21-35 for the season, a win percentage of .375, a half game worse than Caribes de Anzoátegui, for the worst record out of all 8 teams. It was their 2nd straight year missing the playoffs. They were 2nd from the bottom the year before. They were especially bad on the road, going 8-20 away from home. Pitching wasn't bad. They ranked in about the middle of all LVBP teams. Offense was the problem. 238 runs scored for the season, was by far the lowest total. They are not a team known for losing. They were in the playoffs just 3 years ago, won their last league title in 2017, and they seem to have shaken off those 2 losing seasons. This year they are in 4th place, looking like they'll be back in the playoffs. In Colombia's LPB, 1 team was clearly unable to compete with the other 3. Toros de Sincelejo returned after a 3-year absence and went 6-36, 17 games behind the 3rd place team, win percentage .143. For the season they scored 166 runs and allowed 350. Over a 42-game schedule, that means they got beat by an average score of 8-4. The last time Toros had played in LPB was the 2019 to 2020 season, when it was called the LCBP. That year they led the regular season standings at 30-10. Completely different team last year though, and they did not return this year. They were replaced by BC Leones. Panama's four-team LPBP, better known as Pro Base, also had a team that looked like they just didn't belong. Astronautas de los Santos finished with a record of 3-17, win percentage 150. I don't know what their problem was, but it was a huge fall for a team that was 16-5 the year before, when they topped the regular season standings, won the championship series, and represented Panama in the Caribbean Series. Maybe they'll turn it around this year. The Pro Base season has not started yet. In the LBPN of Nicaragua, Tigres de Chinandega finished with a record of 12-20, the worst in the league. 5 teams in the LBPN, and after the regular season, only one is sent home. That team was Tigres. It was an unusually bad season for them. They were league champions in the 2016 to 2017 and 2017 to 2018 seasons, back-to-back. They followed that with 3 consecutive runner-up finishes. 2 years ago, they topped the regular season standings with a record of 26-14. Then a year ago fell from first to last. This year they're looking better, 12-10 at the moment, and tied for second. In the Mexican Pacific League, the LMP, Tomateros de Culiacan were the worst team from start to finish. They were the worst team in the first half with a record of 14-21. Then they were the worst team in the second half with a record of 12-21. Their overall record was 26-42, last out of the 10 LMP teams, 3 games behind the number 9 team. Win percentage 382. This is a team that won back-to-back LMP titles in the 2019 to 2020 and 2020 to 21 seasons. 2 years ago, they reached the final series of the LMP playoffs. Then a year ago, finished last. What's really crazy is that the team that beat them in the final series 2 years ago, Charros de Jalisco, was the second worst team last year. The 2 finalists from 2 years ago were the bottom 2 a year ago. Tomateros are a team known for winning 4 league titles in the last 10 years, and this year they have returned to winning. They finished the first half in 3rd place, and will most certainly be making a return to the playoffs. One more winter league all the way on the other side of the world, the Australian Baseball League. Actually, it's summer there now. 2 years ago, the season was cancelled. Last year, they were back in action. And for the first time in 3 years, they were returning with all 8 teams. The Sydney Blue Sox were the last place team, with a record of 12.5 and 27. Yes, 12.5. There was a game that couldn't be made up, so half a win was awarded to each team. They were half a game worse than Geelong, Korea, the next worst team. They were equally bad home and away, 7-12 at home, 5-15 on the road. Second lowest scoring team, second most runs allowed. Just not a good team. And that's quite common for them. They miss the playoffs more often than not. The last time they had a winning record was the 2018 to 19 season, the only one of the original 6 ABL teams that has not won an ABL title. But things could be changing right now. The Blue Sox are 6-6, tied for 3rd in the ABL standings, only 12 games into a 40-game schedule. The season could still fall apart, but right now there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic in Sydney. On to the Summer League, starting in Europe. In the Netherlands, the Honkbal Hoofdklasse played a 24-game regular season schedule. The worst team was UVV, at 3 wins, 19 losses, and 2 ties. Sounds pretty bad, but they weren't the worst by very far. 2 other teams had single-digit wins. The Hoofdklasse has 9 teams that can be grouped in 3 very definite tiers. 3 teams at the top dominate, 3 teams at the bottom get kicked around, and 3 teams in the middle. Pitching was the problem for UVV. They were outscored 200-93, second most runs allowed. Offensively, they scored more than 3 other teams. After the regular season, though, the bottom 5 teams moved over to the losers stage, where UVV did not finish last. They were 4th with a record of 8-15-1, while Hoofddorp Pioneers were the worst at 4-19-1. So it's kind of hard to say which team was truly the worst. UVV was not in the Hoofdklasse before last season. They moved up to replace the previous worst team, Silicon Storks. In the Italian Baseball League, the last few years they've included 30 teams at the Serie A level. They used to have only between 6 and 10 teams every year. The teams are anything but equal. Very lopsided results, and it shows in the standings. Only the top 10 or so are competitive. The other 2/3 have no chance. One team, Sala Baganza, was 0-10 in the first phase, the only team to go winless. Outscored 114-15. Average score 11.5 to 1.5. In the losers stage, they did manage some wins, going 7-19, but still finishing last in their group. There were a couple teams that fared worse in that stage, but they were in other groups. Their performance this year was about equal to last year's. In 2022, they were 0-14 in the first phase, then improved a little in the losers stage, going 5-11. In the 8-team Czech Baseball Extraliga, Technika Brno had the worst record at 6-15, outscored 175-90 for an average game score of about 8-4. 2 years ago they played in the lower league but earned a promotion to the top league. Last year they were at the bottom of the final standings at 2-19, but were able to remain in the top league by finishing at the top in the relegation round. This year, though they did have a better regular season, they were third in the relegation round, which means they will not be back next year in Extraliga. In Germany's Baseball Bundesliga, 13 teams took part last summer. The Mannheim Tornadoes were just awful. 1 win, 23 losses, outscored 213-73, an average loss of about 9-3, win percentage of 0.042. The 3 teams that did not make the playoffs from the Bundesliga North played an 8-game relegation round. Mannheim lost all 8 games by a combined score of 108-16, so they got relegated. A year ago they weren't so good either, 6-21 in 2022. It wasn't always this way with the Mannheim Tornadoes. They have won 11 Bundesliga titles, the most in Bundesliga history, but the last of those titles came in 1997. The last time they reached the championship series was in 2003. Back to the Americas and back to Cuba. The 16-team Cuban National Series, formerly a winter league, was in its second year as a summer league. The worst team was a familiar name in the National Series basement, the Guantanamo Indians. They often do finish last, but their 2023 campaign started off with a record of 11-10 through their first 21 games. Then came a 6-game losing streak, and they steadily fell into their usual spot. At the end of the season, they were 24-49, 3 games behind the team in 15th place. Win percentage .329, outscored 502-376. Average score was about 7-5. They actually scored more runs and allowed fewer runs than the next worst team. They just came out on the losing end more often. Guantanamo has finished last out of the 16 teams in the Cuban National Series 3 out of the last 4 years. Only in 2022 did they not finish last. They were second from the bottom that year. But their win total has been going up recently, so they're not as bad as they were before. The team has not won a National Series title since it was established in 1977. Back to Mexico. In the Summer League, the LMB, Piratas de Campeche were rock bottom at 31-57. Last in the South Zone, worst record overall. Outscored 519-340, win percentage .352. 2 games behind the next worst team in the South, Bravos de León. Offensively weak, lowest team batting, on-base percentage, and slugging among all 18 LMB teams. Second from the bottom in home runs, third from the bottom in stolen bases. Pitching wasn't much better. Team ERA of 5.54 was third from the bottom. Team whip of 160 put them in the bottom 5. Piratas have had a hard time trying to get something going in recent years. They were second from the bottom in each of the 2 previous seasons, and they haven't reached the playoffs since 2016, even though 6 of the 9 teams in each zone get to qualify. Heading north, Major League Baseball, the Oakland A's were the worst team in the American League for the second year in a row. This time they managed to reduce their win total by 10 games and finish with the worst record in all of Major League Baseball, with a record of 50-112, 40 games out of first, 23 games behind the next worst team in the AL West, 6 games behind the next worst team in Major League Baseball, a win percentage of .309, run differential of -339. A's had the lowest team OPS of all 30 Major League teams at .668, lowest team batting .223, fewest runs scored with 585. The White Sox were the next weakest team offensively, but they scored 56 more runs than the A's could manage. They were near the middle of the league when it came to home runs, but they were still last in slugging, and they had bad pitching to go along with it. Their .548 team ERA ranked as the second worst in MLB. The A's won 9 World Series back in the day, and they were good not too long ago, reaching the postseason every year from 2018 to 2020, but they've had a lot of trouble recently. And early last season, Oakland fans got the bad news that their team would be relocating to Las Vegas. The worst team in the National League was the Colorado Rockies at 59-103, win percentage .364, run differential of -236. Team ERA was a league worst .567, thanks in part to their home field. Coors Field is known as a hitter's park. Because of that, you expect a high team ERA, but you would also expect them to rank high offensively. but they were in the bottom half of the league in team batting, on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, runs scored, and in the bottom 5 in home runs. It was their 5th year in a row finishing more than 10 games under 500. The last time they reached the postseason was in 2018. Over to the Far East, in Japan's NPB, the worst teams in each league last year were also the worst teams this year. In Central League, the Chunichi Dragons once again finished at the bottom. This time they had the worst record in all of NPB. 56 wins, 82 losses, and 5 ties. Win percentage .405. 29 games out of first. They almost avoided a last-place finish. The defending Central League champion Tokyo Yakult Swallows had 1 more win and 1 more loss, beating the Dragons by mere percentage points. The Dragons only scored 390 runs for the season. That's an average of 2.7 runs per game. The next lowest scoring team in Central League scored 493 runs, over 100 more than the Dragons scored. Lowest team batting, fewest home runs, second fewest stolen bases. They are a good pitching team with the second lowest team ERA. Part of the reason for their strong pitching and poor hitting is that they play in a pitcher's park. But an even bigger reason is that over the years, they've been stocking up on quality pitchers, while hitting seems like an afterthought to them. 26 and 43 on the road, 30 and 39 at home, so not a big difference between home and away games. 12 and 12 versus the Hiroshima Carp, under 500 versus every other team. One bright spot is that they finished somewhat strong. 12 wins, 12 losses in the final month, their only month without a losing record. The Dragons haven't been to the postseason since 2012. In Pacific League, the worst team once again was the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters at 60, 82, and 1. 27.5 games out of first. Out of the 6 Pacific League teams, the Fighters were 5th in scoring, 3rd in team ERA. Lowest team batting, but about average in home runs and stolen bases. They were in 4th place for a while, looked like they might challenge for a postseason spot at the end of the season. But a long losing streak at mid-season sunk them to the bottom, and they never recovered. The Fighters haven't reached the postseason since 2018, last won the Japan Series in 2016. Both the Dragons and Fighters managers were in their 2nd year and have brought their teams to consecutive last-place finishes. A repeat of that next summer and they'll probably be out the door. In Korea, the worst team in the KBO was not the Hanwha Eagles this year. After 3 straight last-place finishes, the Eagles managed a 9th-place finish, almost 8th. They are looking much better now. The team that replaced them at the bottom was a huge surprise. The Kiwoom Heroes, after making it to the Korean Series in 2022, followed it up with a record of 58, 83, and 3, win percentage .411, 1.5 behind the Eagles, 27.5 out of first. 4.2 runs per game was the 2nd lowest in the KBO, 6th in team batting, but last in home runs. 4.9 runs allowed was the 2nd highest, 6th in starting pitcher ERA, 9th in relief pitcher ERA. So you can guess that the team was weak all around, but the major weaknesses were the bullpen and a lack of power. There was some suspicion that the Heroes may not be as good this year, but nobody had picked the Heroes to finish last going into the season. After all, they had Jung-Hoo Lee, the reigning KBO MVP, and Woo-Jin An, the league's best pitcher in 2022. An was still good, but he missed some time and wasn't as good as the previous year. Lee was also good, but unable to match his 2022 MVP numbers. Then he went down with a season-ending injury at mid-season, and the Heroes sunk to the bottom. Their last-place finish ended a streak of 5 straight years reaching the postseason. Last, the CPBL of Taiwan. If you followed the CPBL in previous years but paid no attention this year and had to guess who the last-place team was, you'd probably guess the Fubon Guardians. And you'd be right. In the first half, the Guardians were 21, 35, and 4, 12 games out of first, last out of the 5 CPBL teams. A little better in the second half, 27, 32, and 1. Still last, but only 5.5 games out of first. Full season record was 48, 67, and 5. Win percentage .417. 14 games out of first. 9 games behind the next worst team. Losing record against all other teams. Not a bad pitching team. Their team ERA of .377 ranked 3rd, right in the middle of the league. Offense was the problem. 439 runs scored, about 3.6 per game, was easily the lowest. They were last in batting, on-base percentage, slugging, and home runs. First in stolen bases, though, they had 114 steals. The next best team had only 80. So it was one thing they could do right, but it wasn't enough. The Guardians haven't made it to the playoffs since 2018, haven't won the Taiwan Series since 2016, when they were known as the EDA Rhinos. And there you have it, the worst baseball teams in the world in 2023. How many of these teams will be the worst again in 2024? How many will turn it around and make it to the postseason? Will any of them go from last to first? That seems to happen every year somewhere in the world. Tell us what you think will happen in the comments. That's all for this one, and until next time, this is Baseball International. See ya.